today. We are going to be talking about soil health and how it relates specifically to cover cropping and crop rotation. We're glad to have you all here. So my name is John Little. I am the agriculture and local foods agent in Extension for Durham County. And Melissa, go ahead. Oh, I think you have a microphone issue. There it is.
Apologies. My name is Melissa Bell. I'm the Center for Environmental Farming Systems Research Outreach and Education Liaison. I'm really glad everyone can join us today. I think John is going to start us off today.
And perfect. If you wouldn't mind.
Oh, yes, I was going to cover this first one, yeah? So today we're going to be talking about, as John said, cover crops and crop rotation and how they relate to a healthy soil. So John's going to be talking about why we build healthy soils, how we build them, define crop rotation and the benefits of rotating crops, incorporating cover crops into your rotation, and then making these practices work for you, and then touch on soil testing. Then I'm going to jump in and talk about the types of cover crops that we can use, how to use them on any scale. I'm going to talk about the carbon to nitrogen ratio of the cover crop material, and then some potentials, advantages and disadvantages of different cover crops and how to best choose a cover crop for you. So John's going to go ahead and get us started.
Thank you, Melissa. So today, really, the focus is going to be on soil, and we're going to be talking about things that ideally will make your soil better and stronger for growing the things that you want to grow. Um, as a producer, it's really a good idea to promote soil health for a number of reasons, but one of the bigger, more important ones is that those healthy soils are going to support microbial life that is really going to help the plants function as well as they can. So we'll talk about how and why to get your soils tested. If you've attended a program of mine before, you probably have heard that. We're going to talk about how to manage nutrients and the pH of the soil, the acidity, which has so much to do with the plant's ability to uptake those nutrients. We're going to be talking about organic matter, which is really kind of the reason that we're talking about crop rotation and cover crops, or one of them, and also about how to manage soil conditions. All of these things are necessary for improving soil health, but there's not only one path to the top of the mountain. So, thinking about how these things can work for you and your garden or your farm or whatever you might be growing on. That's kind of what we're going to talk about today. And I will elaborate a little bit more on the next slide to kind of how we can use some of these practices to actually maintain that soil health. Um, Here are really some of the primary principles that, modern agriculture recognizes as helping with soil. But I wanted to elaborate a little bit on some of them and kind of why they're necessary or why they're kind of an alternative to something that you might not want to do. So first off, myself included, many folks at times have to till their fields before planting. Sometimes that works, but ultimately that can disturb those microorganisms that we're trying to take care of. The living roots that you might have through a cash crop, or you might have through a cover crop, or you might have through Mother Nature putting weeds down where there's a vacant space. Keeping those living roots in the soil is going to be important. Keeping the soil covered is going to be important, whether that is with mulch or a cover crop or something else. You don't want the elements, the sun and the rain, hurting that microbial life that's helping your soil. That's what we're trying to take care of. Adding to the organic matter, so those microbes have something to eat, has a lot to do with cover cropping. Um, we don't want to work the soil when it's wet. We don't want to harm the spaces and the structures within the soil where that life can live. Again, it's all about taking care of that living soil. We, if possible, avoid using chemicals that might harm those microorganisms. And then to kind of also reference the importance of root systems, having a biodiverse production area where you are going to have living roots at different times throughout the year will really support that life as the seasons change. Um, we are proponents of organic fertilizers as opposed to synthetic fertilizers because it's essentially the difference between supporting the plant or feeding the plant versus feeding the environment. So considering crop rotation, we first have to kind of understand it before we know how to implement it. And specifically, one of the things that I wanted to draw attention to, one of the resources that I wanted to point to is our county office in Wilkes County, the Cooperative Extension Wilkes County office, who has done a lot of work with cover crops. And some of their research has led to a really good kind of helpful set of instructions. But realistically, we're going to while rotating crops, excuse me, crop rotation as opposed to cover crops. We certainly will be employing cover crops. But crop rotation specifically is growing different types of plants one after the other in the same area. You can promote good nutrient access within the soil. You can ideally replenish a lot of the nitrogen, which is essentially cover crops that are decomposing and turning into soil through green manure. Um, and additionally, crop rotation can prevent pests and pathogens that like one type of plant from staying there another season when another type of plant is growing. You can take away the fuel to the fire that illness and disease and pests might cause. And you can also really help the soil structure and the fertility, kind of considering some of the physical and chemical properties in addition to the biological properties that we're paying attention to. You can really help that by having a biodiverse variety of plants grown within a year within an area. It's a lot to take in, but kind of wanted to lay the foundation for some of the other things that we're going to discuss. Um, Considering some of the things that rotating your crops might impact to you, the grower, um, there has been a lot of evidence that has shown that rotating your crops while also employing conservation tillage, which is essentially any tillage practice that's going to build up those crop residues on the soil surface, keeping that soil covered, minimizing the impact of water and wind erosion. When you do that and you rotate your crops, you really can benefit the physical properties of the soil. Again, we're talking about chemistry and biology here, but if your soil can be maybe less compacted or a number of different characteristics, you're not going to replace clay, sand, or silt, but you really can maneuver around them with a good bunch of plant roots. Legumes, when you use them in a crop rotation, can fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, can essentially absorb nitrogen from around us and put it back into the ground to deposit it for the next thing that you're going to grow that's going to suck it up. Those plants really are two-way streets. They're not just taking things from the soil, they're also putting things in there that, help the life in the soil. Considering that you can rotate your crops in a way that certainly affects the available nutrients in the soil after you maybe terminate that crop or harvest everything that there is to harvest off that crop. You can be really mindful of what that crop does to the soil after it is gone. A big one of them is essentially making sure that nitrogen, which is one of the largest used synthetic fertilizers out there, um, a lot of that happens to leach out of agricultural production areas and go into waters. If you are being mindful of crop rotation and using legumes for nitrogen, you can not only help your farm for cheaper than you would if you were buying these products, you can also help your local environment, which we believe is very important too. Um, So a couple of the basics on crop rotation, we kind of talked about the theory and the why, but I think it helps to look at kind of a simple diagram. At this moment, I want to point to the North Carolina Extension Gardener toolbox and also the Master Gardener Volunteer Program, which has some of the best resources out there at explaining these things. But when you're rotating crops, you don't want to use plants in the same plant family over and over. That can deplete necessary nutrients. It can also create an environment where a specific type of illness or pests will continuously thrive. So, rotating your crops is, I would say, important no matter who you are or where you are. If you're going back and forth, if you're only rotating, it's not really rotation, but if you go from, one thing to the other, a two crop rotation, you lose a lot of those benefits that you would get after having three plants in three different families over three different seasons. That's when you're going to get the most benefit to the soil and the plant, and that is when you're going to see the most reduction in pathogens. Also, if there's a time when you don't have something that you're trying to grow, you maybe you don't have something that you want for your family or for the market. Um, that's a really good time to incorporate a cover crop. You can be mindful about perhaps a multi-species cover crop where you can, shoot one of us an email, shoot Melissa and I or I an email, but we can kind of probably give you some advice on what types of seeds to put into the ground that might affect your soil in desirable ways. Crop rotation can drastically increase health and fertility of the soil when they're done effectively, and you can really reduce a lot of the stress that you might have on crops. Um, it's a learning process. Your first time won't be your best time, but your second time will be better than your first. So considering pH, pH is a measure of acidity. If you need to lower it, we use lime. If we want to raise it, we use sulfur. More often than not, we're lowering it, or we desire to lower it. The ideal pH range for most plants is high fives to high sixes. Um, but there are some exceptions like blueberries, which are going to like it, high fours, low fives. Um, that I say that to say that it's important, and not that you're going to be rotating a perennial plant like blueberries, but an example of an outlier plant in pH requirements. It's important to determine what crop you're going to grow in a location before you are amending the soil. That pH adjustment kind of happens slowly, but in the same way that you're considering soil amendments, also consider that maybe you had a legume crop where you fixed a bunch of nitrogen, and the next plant that you're going to grow or you want to grow has, make sure that it has high nitrogen requirements is kind of what I'm trying to say. So consider the next plant and what soil characteristic it needs before you nail down your crop rotation. We talked a little bit about some of the plant families that you can kind of alternate between. This is a good list. And actually, another extension office, this is Carteret County. Um, One of the folks there put together some of the more common food crops in this area from different plant families. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, but it might be a good idea to rotate between something in the onion family, something in the cucumber family, something in the broccoli family, something that beans or peas, corn, um, spinach, and beets, same plant family. You might not think about it because beets are a root vegetable, but if you think about the greens, they're not that different from spinach. Something in the tomato, pepper, nightshade family, and then something in the dill or carrot family, and then lastly, greens, lettuce greens. All of them have a totally different, well, often different range of pests and pathogens that will go for them, and many of them have different preferences for what the soil is like. So here's a very basic, not exhaustive list of some of the things that you can grow, and most of them are going to do well around here. I feel like there's something I'm forgetting about that, but I'll bounce back to it if I need to. Um, Considering uh, we can move on one slide if you wouldn't mind. Considering nutrient availability. Um, very basic breakdown of that is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are the three nutrients used most by plants. And we generally either have to add to them with fertilizers or to check to see if we need to add to them. The other nutrients are, provided. Sometimes you can find like dolomitic lime. I won't go down that rabbit hole right now. But if you need them in small amounts because they're deficient, you can often use substances like compost or manure. Now, I digress. Another way you can manage those things is by taking care of the soil health and the environment in which the plants are growing, because having healthy soils full of microbial life consuming organic matter that may or may not have been left previously by green manures or not, if you're taking care of that soil, the plants are going to grow better, and the plants are going to make the most of their available resources around them. Again, that is a rabbit hole in itself, but we here are advocates of soil health and firsthand will tell you of its value in crop production. No, you're right on track. We'll move forward to some of the alternative things that we discuss. Um, Tilling, again, can have some issues, some negative impacts on the soil. Water doesn't cycle quite as well, which affects the ability of the nutrients to be uptaken by the plants. Um, and that there's quite a few problems that can come with, I'll say, irresponsible tilling. Many people are going to till a little bit, but if you employ crop rotation, probably incorporating cover crops at some point throughout your year, and Melissa will talk a lot more about that, but that can really prevent a lot of the need for tillage, which can open up its own can of worms. Well, probably not worms. You'll probably be killing the worms if you're tilling, but I digress again. So, soil type, that's going to, let me see. Would you go back one slide? I just want to touch on one thing that's going to just the type of soil that you have, and I know we've got a wide range of audience or wide geography of folks attending this, but your soils will vary from place to place throughout the state, and essentially the effectiveness of some of these things are going to depend on if you're dealing with clay or sand or something in between. So talk to us about where you are. I see that we got a question in the chat about explaining green manures. Essentially, if you have a cover crop and you allow that cover crop to fall onto the essentially once it's dying, allow it to fall where it lays. You can um, uh, not plow it over, but you can kind of roll it and get it to where it's directly on ground level and more close to some of those organisms. And
I'll talk more about that too, John.
okay, yeah, I was gonna say I thought you'd talk about it a little bit. But yeah, realistically, green manures are really going to be an effective alternative to some of the synthetic things that you can add. But I'll save that for Melissa. I know Melissa talks better than I do about some of those things. So thank you. And then as we move on, I want to talk about that organic matter a little bit more. So these different stages of living and once living materials are going to perform different functions within the soil. Um, Essentially, the what we're trying to get to whenever we're doing something like putting down, or incorporating green manure, what we're trying to get to are decomposing materials that provide access to nutrients to those microorganisms. Whenever they're fully decomposed, then they become soil in itself. But let me talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. Melissa, would you advance? Thank you. So the living organisms, the microbial life that we're trying to promote, um, likes to tunnel around, break down materials, decomposing these materials, which then releases nutrients, and also holds water as opposed to letting it just fall through. And then essentially that fully decomposed material helps stick the soil particles together to form good structure. that structure is a big part of what can make water and nutrients available to the plants. Um, if you see on here microfauna and macrofauna, microfauna, tiny organisms, macrofauna, larger animals. So there's a lot of different processes that break down that plant matter into soil that's accessible by other plants. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about how crop rotation specifically can impact soil health. Would you advance one slide, please? Thank you. Um, so there's a few ways that crop rotation while incorporating cover crops can specifically improve that soil health. We mentioned the microbes. I won't spend more and more time talking about that. But leaving that organic matter, reducing the erosion. We talk about soil structure. Erosion is largely loss of the soil that can have good structure. So again, that principle of keeping your soil covered, we're not using mulch to do that, but we're using additional plants in sequence, some of which may be the only benefit that we have is keeping the ground covered, which is a worthy benefit in itself. I won't talk any more about this at the moment, but I do want to move forward and talk a little bit about why keeping that soil covered is helpful. One of which, obviously, weed control. If there's a vacancy, nature's going to put something there. You probably hear me say nature abhors a vacuum most webinars that we do. But if there's a cover crop there, then the pigweed's probably not going to come in. Then you know, all the other host of bad weeds. So regulating the soil temperatures, that's big. Not having direct sun on the area where those worms in that picture are going to grow and eat and live. That's important. And then rain, honestly, now's probably a time that we as an audience, have a respect for water, the power of water. And I mean, even if it's not a hurricane or something catastrophic, if you're having raindrops just hammer the ground and pound on the ground, you can really honestly do a lot of damage to the little creatures that are keeping the plant's roots healthy. Reduced water loss as well. We're keeping the water that falls in the same area where it fell for those plants. So kind of a local foods principle, if you will, keeping the resources there. So, a couple last things before I turn it over to Melissa, who is going to tie a lot of these theories that I've been talking about together with some practice and some science. Test your soil because any of these things that we're doing uh, essentially are shots in the dark if you don't know the metrics that you're working with. Um, Yesterday is the best time to sample your soil. You can do it throughout the year for no cost using these resources. Our NCDA Soils Lab, any county is going to have an extension office that will help you collect and submit samples if you would like. It's free at all times other than between Thanksgiving and like the end of March, which it's good to sample around that time, but the ground's probably pretty hard anyway. So I won't go into too much more depth on testing your soil, other than it is absolutely needed before you do anything like picking a cover crop or a crop rotation setup or picking fertilizers. Anything that you do, please know what the soil looks like before you do it. And if you do choose to collect soil samples, which I hope you will if you're growing anything, test your soil in different zones, essentially, where one location is sampled together kind of by management practice, essentially. If you have a bunch of little raised garden beds, a lot of what we're trying to talk about today is scalable from the very small to the very big. Let me even say this. If you are growing in 5 gallon buckets, if you're growing in a 5 gallon pot, um, that pot or that bucket or that little garden bed needs to be a sample of its own. Um, even if it's right next to the other one. But if there was no partition, if there was no, container that that soil was kept in, and it was free to, leach and flow, have nutrients leach and flow between them, I would say just consider a single management area. Um, Take your cores, take your samples, mix them together so that you can get the average of those samples within a management area. Again, we can walk you through this, but at that point, whenever you know that the one sample you took is not just on a cow patty or something, you want to know what's going on in that area. Once you have those samples, then you can bring them to your extension office, and we are happy to help you create a baseline from which then you can kind of determine a crop rotation scheme or for fertilization or whatever you want to do. But I think Melissa will do a great job of tying together some of the things that I've been haphazardly trying to explain as I go. So, Melissa, take it away, and thank you all for listening.
Great. Thanks, John. Yeah, as John said, I'm going to expand a little bit about specific cover crops, advantages, disadvantages, etc. I'm going to jump right in. The definition of a cover crop is a crop planted between periods of regular crop production to provide other benefits besides food production. So they are a great way to increase organic matter in your soil. They help keep nutrients and water within the root zone. And depending on your cover crop, if you choose a legume, there can actually add nitrogen to the soil. They keep our soil healthy by recycling and conserving water. There's definitely higher soil moisture underneath a cover crop. They can keep nutrients within the root zone. As you know, our nutrients are in sort of a soil solution in the root zone. Some cover crops, grasses and grains, are called catch crops, meaning that they can catch and nutrients that are in the root zone and keep them within the root zone, and then when the material dies, it returns those nutrients. So the nutrients are not lost through the soil profile when you're not growing a vegetable crop. Some cover crops can break through a plow pan. They have deep tap roots. It's called biodrilling. Cover crops definitely help protect soil structure and maintain that pore space that's so important in the soil. The gas space, water, and spaces for microbes and organic matter. Cover crops can be used as a living mat. Someone mentioned green manure. So that would be growing a cover crop and then killing it and letting it stay on the soil surface to keep weeds down, protect soil moisture, and then also release nutrients. So that's adding biomass and increasing soil organic material. They support pollinators. And then as I'm going to hope to show you is that there's a cover crop for every season or situation that you have. So we divide cover crops into grasses and grains. Grasses and grains tend to have extensive root systems, and they hold on to nutrients and water. They produce substantial amounts of above ground biomass. Most all of them are allelopathic, meaning that while they're growing, their roots are exuding chemicals that suppress the growth of other weeds. And they decompose slower than the more herbaceous legumes, which we'll talk about. Then we have brassicas and mustards, things like turnips, forage radishes, daikon radishes, mustards. We have sunflower and buckwheat. I kind of put them in their own category. Both are summer cover crops that are excellent beneficial habitats. They grow really different. Sunflowers all summer long, buckwheat's 30 days to maturity. But both are great for pollinators and beneficial insects. And then our legumes, which are fixing atmospheric nitrogen. So what that means is that in the soil, in the root zone, there is a soil bacteria called rhizobium that is in a symbiotic relationship with the legume plant, and it's able to take atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into mineral nitrogen available for plants. Legumes also attract beneficials. They're a great source of nectar when they flower. They are fixing that atmospheric nitrogen, but the plant itself is also 3 to 5% nitrogen, depending on when it's terminated. So as it decomposes, it's releasing that nitrogen into the soil as well. And legumes decompose rather quickly. So let's look at some examples. Oh, yeah. Before I get into examples, I wanted to show you the different root architecture of some of the things we're going to be talking about. So I pointed out here cereal rye. So this is one of our winter grains that we use a lot. Also, you can see ryegrass. So grasses are known for having an extensive surface root system. They also have some roots that go deeper, but they're known for this extensive root zone. Um, I mean, near the surface root network. That's why they're called a catch crop. They're able to hold on and retain nutrients and water. Here we can look at the radish, the oilseed radish and our daikon radish. Not a big network of near surface roots, but a huge taproot that when that radish is pulled or decomposes, leaves these deep channels deep into the soil profile, where more water and nutrients can get deeper into the soil profile. Clover's not on here, but we see vetch here, which is another winter legume. Not really known for a great root system, but they have many other benefits, just when compared to, say, our grass that we're looking at. And then also our mustards, rapeseed, our brassica, with a pretty extensive root system as well. Just gives you a good idea of the different architecture of the different kinds of plants we're talking about. So for example, summer grass would be a sorghum Sudan grass hybrid between sorghum, grain sorghum, and Sudan grass. These are excellent soil builders, fast growing, lots of biomass. They have an aggressive root system, so they're an excellent catch crop. They are heat and drought resistance. They love growing in North Carolina in the summer. You get a lot of biomass rather quickly. They also are a great subsoil loosener. If you mow them at 3 to 4 weeks, leaving 6 inches of stubble, you're going to increase the root mass, and it forces the roots to penetrate deeper into the subsoil. So they fill a really nice niche in the middle of the summer. So I plant a lot of sorghum Sudan grass down at our small farm unit in the coastal plain. They're widely adaptable with pH, and they have allelopathic properties. I put in here the rates. We'll talk about rates a little later, but drilled at 35 to 40 pounds per acre or broadcast at 40 to 50. The seed is readily available and not very expensive. You can plant it all the way from a 1/2 inch to 2 inches deep if it's dry. You can plant it really deep to try to get to that soil moisture. So mature in 45 days, you get a really quick canopy cover and no weeds, and a lot of above ground biomass. Another summer grass, millets. These are an upright bunch grass, so they grow a little differently. They have these cattail-like inflorescences. Another quick growth, good scavenger, soil builder. It's going to protect the soil from erosion, good at keeping weeds down. It also, if it's mowed mid-season, you stimulate root growth, also allelopathic. I find on our sandier soils in a droughty summer, I find that Sudan grass outcompetes millets. But if you're growing on a smaller scale where you can water it, or if you we don't irrigate our cover crops, then the millets I'm sure will perform well. But I prefer to use the Sudan grass. Winter grains. So cereal rye is a grain. We grow it as a cover crop. It's an excellent scavenger. So if you've been growing corn or you've been growing tomatoes and you've been putting nitrogen down for those crops, when that's done, you're still going to have nitrogen or potassium in the soil solution. And this rye can take all those nutrients up. It typically carries 25 to 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre over into the spring. As it decomposes, then it's going to release that back into the soil solution. So it's a good soil builder with this above ground biomass. It's allelopathic. A lot of people have studied the allelopathic properties of rye. It's going to keep everything down while it's growing, and then you want to leave. I don't know the exact amount of time, but a couple weeks before you plant again, so those allelopathic chemicals are not still in the soil. Really good in poor fertility soil, attracts ladybugs. Can be established in cool weather. Rye is one of the ones that we can plant all the way up into the beginning of December in the coastal plain. Oats. I love planting oats. I just planted oats and crimson clover in many fields down at our small farm near Goldsboro. It's an upright grass. It's an excellent catch crop. I find it to be quicker growing in the fall than the rye. Good weed suppressor, also allelopathic. So let's talk about a winter legume now. Crimson clover. Everyone's favorite. Crimson clover is a winter annual. You know, the white clover we see in lawns, that's a perennial. Red clover is a perennial, often used as a hay crop. But our crimson clover is an annual winter cover crop here. It's a good nitrogen source, so it's fixing nitrogen. It keeps the soil covered over winter, prevents erosion. Many of the legume crimson clover varieties you can get, like Dixie reseeding, will reseed themselves. They also overseed really well. There are some soybean producers that will, you know, drop overseed soybeans with crimson clover, and then the soybean leaves drop and cover the seed, and it will germinate. It's good to grow in between crops in the winter. It's a beneficial habitat, nectar source when it flowers. You have to inoculate it if you haven't grown it before. But like I said, you know, we have a lot of clovers in our soil around here, but inoculation is not hard. When you buy your seed, there will be a little packet of rhizobia. And it just entails taking your seed in, say, like a bucket and wetting it a little bit and adding the packet. There'll be directions on the packet and mixing it all together, and then you plant your seed. So then your soil is inoculated with this rhizobium to form that symbiotic relationship to fix nitrogen. Crimson clover flowers in early to mid-April, so it works really well with, say, corn or summer crops that you're going to be planting in late April or May. The maximum nitrogen return of the nitrogen in the plant, I said it's 3 to 5%, is just as it begins to flower. So once the plant flowers and starts to make seed, it's going to take all that energy, all that nitrogen, and put it into the seed. So you want to terminate the plant just as it begins to flower to get the maximum nitrogen return. That being said, you know, you can terminate a cover crop whenever it works best for you. The days to maturity is to let you know how you can maximize the benefits from your particular cover crop. But if you want to go a cover crop, you know, you can terminate it whenever you need to. Like
Hey,
I said,
Melissa, can I ask a quick question? That's
yeah.
it's in the chat, but I think it's relevant here more than later. Do the allelopathic cover crops affect the next crop's growth?
Yes, they can. So I would, you know, depending on the crop, like I know the rye has been heavily studied. Like I said, I don't remember the exact amount of time. Is it 2 weeks or 4 weeks that you would wait? Also depends on the crop that you're planting. You know, lettuce might be more susceptible to the chemicals than, say, corn. But that's information that is available on the web. So yes, to answer your question, there is a small time gap. It's not a huge time gap, but then those chemicals will be leached out of the soil solution.
Thank you.
So crimson clover is super forgiving, and it will germinate if you throw it on the soil. This is just to give you an idea of these are my beds out front, a couple of them. And I've thrown crimson clover down with my onions. I've got some onions growing in here. This is just a bed of crimson clover, and then I threw some down in between my strawberries, in between my collards and kale. So admittedly, I did not measure this out, which you should, but I've been growing crimson a long time, and I kind of have an idea of how much to put down. But crimson clover you throw it on the soil, incorporate it a little bit, just cover it up, and it will germinate for you. It's a fabulous cover crop, and it keeps the soil covered all winter. Beautiful flowers in the spring. Another winter legume is vetch with a really different growth habitat. It's a vine. It grows slower in the fall, but it grows all winter. So crimson clover is going to establish itself and start growing in the fall. Ideally, if you plant in October, you're going to get growth up until it's, you know, December, and then it's going to go dormant until late February, March. But vetch will keep growing. The roots will keep growing. So it's a really effective smothering weeds in the early spring. Now, vetch makes an excellent green manure. As you can imagine, if grown alone, it forms this mat. And it's the heaviest contributor of nitrogen of the legumes that we have available, especially in the winter. In the summer, we have cowpea. So it matures later than clover, depending on if you want to wait for these flowers. It's not gonna mature till June. Works really well if you are rotating crops and you have an area that you're just gonna cover crop for a year. And you can let this go until June and then follow it with a summer cover crop. Excellent green manure. The seed is a little more expensive than clover. I'm going to mention a resource at the end, but Country Farm and Home in Pittsburgh is where I get most of my seed. And what's nice about that Country Farm and Home is that you can buy seed by the pound. So if you need 2 pounds of vetch or 5 pounds of clover, you can get that there. Summer legumes, cowpea. This is cowpea here. Wonderful summer cover crop for us. Often called southern peas, black-eyed peas. Loves the heat, loves hot, moist conditions, and also excellent in drought conditions. It grows really quick and shades out weeds. It has partial shade tolerance, so it's great in mixes. Attractive to beneficials, decomposes pretty rapidly. You can grow it, say, in between corn, although it is going to climb your corn stalks. But you can turn it under after 60 to 90 days. I just saw something in the chat about we can talk about so rye termination of a cover crop. The stage of the cover crop is going to determine how well you terminate it. So if someone mentioned something about rye not staying dead when you kill it, and that's directly associated with the stage of growth of rye when you killed it. We usually flail mow our crops so we don't have any trouble with them staying dead when they're mowed. But we can talk about that further if there's time. So here's a nice summer mix. This summer at our small farm unit, I planted a mix of Sudan grass, buckwheat, and cowpea. You see our Sudan grass here, buckwheat, which will reseed itself after 30 days. And here is our cowpea here and here. And then they've thrown in a little bit of sun hemp here, which I'll talk about in a moment. I would not recommend, because of price, buying a mix unless you have a really small space, but it's easy enough to buy a couple of pounds of each of these yourself, much more cost effective, and then plant a mix that way. This is sun hemp. I'll just mention it briefly. It's not a hemp. It's a Crotalaria species. It's a tall, fibrous legume. Really rapid growth, 6 feet in 30 days. Loves hot, dry conditions. It's a subtropical plant. It can get really big and really lignified, though, too tall. And what that means is it's going to take a long time to decompose. So this is a back vegetable bed of mine, and I just mostly grew it because I love it and for the flowers. It's a great cut flower. But in order to wait long enough to get this flower, it's going to be really slow to decompose. But sun hemp is it's wonderful if you have a larger field and can mow it, when it's about 4 or 5 feet tall. Nitrogen fixing, and not a weed is going to grow in the plot where sun hemp is growing. Sunflower and buckwheat quickly, because I really want to talk about carbon to nitrogen ratio. Both summer pollinator habitats, very different growth. I'm talking about black oil sunflower, not cut sunflower. You get these big fields of sunflower. So that's an all summer long summer cover crop, whereas buckwheat is 30 days. Buckwheat reseeds itself, grows really well in between crops or as borders. Beneficial insects love buckwheat, and it's a really quick growing. Fills a really good niche. Mustards are brassicas, oilseed radish. Daikon here is a subsoiler, planted in the fall for early spring, often winter kills. All our mustards contain glucosinolates, which is an organic sulfur compound that can be used as a nematicide. I have not done this. I grow mustard, seen here, because I love the flower in early spring, and early March, late February, we'll get these flowers, and the bees are really happy to have a nectar source. A field of mustard and clover is just beautiful in April. But I know that our potato growers in the Midwest will grow this mustard, Mighty Mustard. I think it's a proprietary name. And it has to be terminated right at flowering, incorporated, and then covered. But it is an effective nematicide. And there's a lot of information on the web if you've got a nematode problem and wanted to try mustard. It's got a really low seeding rate, so it's pretty cost effective. Okay, so mixes. This is what I love to talk about. So carbon to nitrogen ratio is important. The carbon to nitrogen ratio of the material is important because it affects the rate of decomposition. So our microbes in the soil that are doing all the decomposition they need a CN ratio of 24:1. So if a material like our beautiful crimson clover legume here has a low C/N ratio, so below 24:1, it's going to decompose really easily and really quickly. The microbes are like, yay, we have all this nitrogen. And it's called mineralization of nitrogen. So they quickly release all that nitrogen into the soil solution, maybe before your tomatoes or corn are developed enough to take it up. So it gets lost through the soil profile. If, like this rye, your C/N ratio is high, above 24:1, then the microbes are going to be scavenging around in the soil looking for nitrogen, so they have the correct ratio to keep decomposing. So they're going to immobilize nitrogen from the soil solution. They're going to remove it. And when they die and decompose, and as the material decomposes and gets closer to 24:1, then that nitrogen is re-released, but it's temporarily immobilized. So when we mix a legume and a grass, not only do we get the benefits of both and the below ground root architecture of both, we also bring the ratio closer to 24:1. I failed to mention, so things like cowpea and vetch are vines and climbers, so they love to be planted with the grass because then they can climb the grasses. So it's really a win-win when you mix a legume and a grass or a grain. Here we can see carbon to nitrogen ratios of different material. Here's our ideal microbial diet, 24:1. And then we have our alfalfa, our vetches, our manures below 24:1. Hairy vetch really low, 11:1. I think clover is 25:1. I'm sorry, 15:1. And then our grasses and grains are going to be above 24:1. I did want to point out, though, how the C/N ratio changes over time, the stage of growth. So if we look at vegetative rye cover crop, it's only 26:1. When the rye starts to flower, it jumps up to 37:1. And then by the time it's mature and dry as a straw, it's 82:1. So you're going to have a lot of nitrogen immobilization, trying to break that material down, and it's going to decompose really slow. So mixes, bring that ratio closer to 24:1. And then you get a slower decomposition of material and a more even, slower release of the nutrients into the soil solution. I promised some scaled down seeding rates. Most of what you'll read and what I work with is in pounds per acre. A really easy, to know that there's 43,560 square feet in an acre. You can easily do the conversion. You might have 0.003 acres. And then you can scale, you don't need 100 pounds, you need 15 pounds. 16 ounces in a pound, 453 grams in a pound. So this resource gave it on ounces per 100 square feet. If you wanted to do, so don't scramble, you're going to get a copy of all this. Don't scramble to write it all down, but our mustards and radishes are as low as 1 ounce per 100 square feet. Crimson, 2 to 3 ounces per 100 square feet. When I do things, I have this tiny little scale that I love. It's called a scaly. I use it for baking bread. I use it for measuring nutrient fertilizer and for measuring seed. So I like to turn things into grams, because oftentimes I'll scale everything down and it'll be, 0.8 of a pound of clover. And if you turn that into grams, and I don't know the conversion right off, but it's much easier to deal with 25 grams than it is with 0.8 of a pound. So I often turn things into grams.
Hey, Melissa, I just wanted to keep you posted on time. We're at 12:53, so we're probably cutting it close for Q&A.
Okay, well, I think I'm just about done here. Selecting a cover crop, you just want to figure out what your goal is. Do you want biomass? Do you want to add nitrogen? Is weed suppression your main goal? And then to look at days to maturity to see if you're going to get the maximum benefit of that cover crop. Any space that you have, or if you're rotating and you have a blank, a space that you're not going to be growing crops in that year, is space for a cover crop. I wanted to mention this resource, Managing Cover Crops Profitably. It has these awesome charts about each plant, whether it's a good nitrogen scavenger or quick growth weed fighting. advantages, disadvantages, cultural traits. Does it like heat? Does it like low fertility? This is it's the book, but it's also, oh, I can't see it. It's also a free PDF online. I use this all the time. Excellent resource for cover crops and help you choose a cover crop. And there's my plug for Country Farm and Home in Pittsburgh, and then mentioning the next webinar. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Melissa. So we did put the link for Country Farm and Home's website in the chat as well, if you all are interested. Please, if you're interested in hearing how we can do some of these practices and grow some of the things we're talking about in cool season, please attend our next one. I see somebody who asked about PDF. We will be sending out in the coming days a copy of the slides for those who are interested to take a look. Please, oh, Tino, we see that you're on there. So we've got a few minutes for Q&A, and after that, if anybody wants to stay for another minute or two longer, we are going to talk about some ways that you can provide resources and help to the folks in Western North Carolina. So stick around for that after the Q&A if you're interested. But as far as questions and answers, so Sharon asked regarding vetch. Do we
Yeah,
need to worry about vetch invading other parts of the property?
yeah, I would say so. Vetch can be vetch is considered weedy by definitely can be considered weedy. But I wouldn't worry about vetch spreading to other parts um of your farm or your yard. It might reseed and become a problem where you planted it, but not spreading into other places. Um, so yeah,
Me-
that hasn't been a
Thank you.
problem. I was sorry, I was looking at what Taylor had to say. That's great
Yeah.
advice. Yeah, planting directly into a rolled rye cover crop. I mean, you certainly would have to wait for those chemicals to disperse. But yes, when you're leaving the cover on top, you're going to get a much slower decomposition. The tarping idea is great. Rolling crimping rye can be tricky. It has to be done at the right stage. But I mean, it's a really good, that's a really soil healthy system that you have going there.
Um,
Um,
if you're, are you looking at the chat right now?
I was, yeah.
So, the I see that we've got a couple questions. Alyssa had asked about sunflowers remediating contamination or heavy metals in the soil,
Yeah.
and what would happen after they decompose. I don't know. Do you know that?
So I mean, I have some personal experience with that. We had high tunnels at the small farm that were continuously covered for like 4 years, and they're pretty small high tunnels, and we were growing a lot of strawberries and stuff in there, and we got a lot of salt buildup from nutrients in the soil, and so I planted sunflowers, but because I read the same thing, and um, then you remove the material. So I mean, that was my solution to it. I don't know about, if there are left to decompose in the soil, I would think that they would re-release that material into the soil. So we cut them and removed them. Let me shut the door.
Yeah, that's getting rid of heavy metals is something that once in a while we hear about, and I think realistically, cover cropping or crop rotation would certainly be a biological solution, but my understanding would be that the mechanical solution of removal afterward would probably be necessary as well.
Yeah.
Um,
I'd
and
like to
then,
answer Ashley's question. A favorite cover crop for sandy, low pH soil to improve fertility? Um, yes, sorghum Sudan grass. So it grows really well in sandy soils. We never fertilize our cover crops, nor do we irrigate. But that's adding a lot of biomass to the soil. Grasses themselves also contain a little bit of nitrogen as they decompose. A mix of cowpea and Sudan grass during the summer would be, I think, a great way to increase fertility. So in order to increase fertility, you want to increase the organic matter in the soil, right? And so adding that above ground biomass is a good way to do that. And we have really sandy soils at our small farm unit near Goldsboro. Some of the soils are very sandy, others are a nice sandy loam. Um, but the Sudan grass cowpea in the summer and the oats and clover or the rye and clover um, really grow well, and I think you can see an increased tilth in the soil. So that's like a physical indicator of health. It just feels healthier. It's more organic matter is what you're seeing.
You can probably feel it and smell it.
Yeah.
And, more than one of your senses can detect that organic matter. Only another minute or two, but I see.
Garlic. Yeah, I plant clover with my garlic. Um,
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've done that as well. I also see Alan had mentioned using birdfoot trefoil. And
mhm.
if we have any thoughts, honestly, folks who are raising animals are an audience that we really try to make sure that we're addressing as well. So Melissa, what about you? Have you used
No,
birdfoot?
I have not.
I can't say that I know much about it as well, but Alan, you make me inclined to look into it and investigate for some of my livestock producers. I don't know much, but I realize that I will probably have to learn. Um, so okay, we're at 1 p.m. Any
Okay.
For those of you who are still interested, Calliope put in the chat some of the resources, and scroll up a little bit if you'd like to see it, but some of the resources that we have for offering assistance directly or indirectly to folks in Western North Carolina. Extension is sending folks to work at distribution sites to help with hay for livestock farmers, necessary supplies for everybody else. I am lucky enough to be going out tomorrow for 1 week. So if you email me in the next week, I probably won't hear back from you for another week, but I'll try. If you are a producer and you are interested in some of the national level options for recovery and assistance. There is a webinar hosted by the USDA in 2 hours. That is the top bullet point in the list that Calliope mentioned. The second point is our resources offered by the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at NC State. Check that link out. Numerous resources there for institutions you can be involved with. If you're looking for something a little more specific to farm support, check out the Visit NC Farms link. They specifically are locally working with farms in the western end of the state to offer assistance to them and through them. And then lastly, the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association has some pretty strong or at least comprehensive list of resources that you can help there as well. So if you're interested in helping and you don't have a good outlet to do so, here are three things and a webinar I think that will probably offer you a great degree of insight. And yeah, thank you for everybody who's still here for listening. We really do want to help our friends out west. Um, that's all I got. We are after ending time. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I see that Rye mentioned Soul Fire Farm in the book Farming While Black. I have it. I don't recall the part about sunflowers. So thank you for sharing that. I'll have to reread that. It's probably about time. Um, Thank you all for being here today. Shoot us an email if you have any questions. We took track of the folks who wanted the slides afterward, and please attend our next one, December 17th. That'll be one that probably most folks can relate to. So thank you all for being here today.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, please feel free to email us with questions that we didn't get to.
Perfect. And we're keeping track of the folks who need the slides. So thank you all very much. We look forward to seeing you on the next one.